Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gamification Revolution. I am your host, Gabe Zichermann. I'm so excited to see you all. I'm coming to you live from a late, beautiful evening in Istanbul, and I'm joined by my guest today, Leo Trottier from CleverPet, who is in San Diego. Hello, Leo.
Hey Gabe, how's it going? So happy to be here.
So good and so excited to have you, and so excited to have all of you who are watching us live. If you're listening to this particular Gamification Revolution webinar from iTunes, or you're watching it on Spreecast after the fact, you can join us typically every week or every other week, and watch the show live. And if you're with us live right now, yay! I'm so glad that you're here. You can actually jump on and ask Leo or I questions during this chat by logging in using one of your social media profiles. You'll need to log in here on this Spreecast platform. And once you've logged in, you can chat with us, you can ask us questions. You can even come on camera. I don't know that your camera will work, and I don't know that you're wearing pants, but assuming that you're both wearing pants and your camera works, you can come live and ask us questions on this short show. And otherwise, be sure to join us live when you can. Okay, so Leo, CleverPet is one of the coolest things that I'd ever seen.
Oh,
Can
thanks,
you
Gabe.
tell us? Can you tell us a little bit about what it's about?
So, at CleverPet, we believe that animals can do so much more. In particular, we believe people's dogs and maybe even their cats can do so much more. And so what we do is we make what you might call smart gaming systems for people's homes that dogs can play with during the day so they're not bored and tear up the couch. And the way
I
we do
love
that, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, I love the kind of simplicity of that. Tell us how it works.
Yeah, so the way we do that is I could go grab the device actually if you want, but uh, we have a simple, it kind of looks like a Roomba. It's got three touch pads that light up in colors the dogs can see. It's got a speaker that can speak to dogs in their owner's voice. It's got a microphone that listens for dog barks, and it's got a continuous connection to the internet. And in the morning, instead of putting your dog's food in a dog bowl, you put it in what we call the Clever Pet Hub. And over the course of the day, your dog gets a single piece of his food at exactly the right time when they do the right thing, and solve a little puzzle that we present using the touchpads. That's the simplest thing, but we can get very
So,
complex even with a very simple interface.
so how did the idea of making a game that dogs would play come to you?
Yeah, so my background was originally in cognitive science and artificial intelligence. I attended the University of Toronto, and then came to UC San Diego to start a PhD in cognitive science. And so I've just always been really interested in the intersection of technology and culture and cognitive science and the mind and all that stuff. Um, and uh, you know, while I initially joined because I was interested in the foundations of cognitive science. But while I was there, I actually started making this. My idea was people play a whole bunch in like virtual worlds, things like World of Warcraft, and a lot of people are very good at remembering the overall environment structure of virtual worlds. So I was interested in figuring out, well, maybe if we designed a virtual environment that was shaped like the inside of a body, that people could learn anatomy while playing World of Warcraft, kind of, right? So that was like one of those things at that intersection. Um, and I was also helping run Scholarpedia, which was all about wikifying scholarly canons, which was about kind of motivating people to share their knowledge, motivating academics to share their knowledge publicly rather than in peer-reviewed journals. And that also was about this intersection. And then when I noticed that people's homes already had all the technology for providing engaging stimulation to sad, bored, lonely pets, um, but for the addition of like the right kind of food handling and provision device and some smart software, then I just knew this was something that had to exist because like thousands and thousands of hours every year. um, are wasted basically and cause misery among pets. And like we can actually do something about that with technology finally today.
Is there some science to back up the idea that dogs will play games, or are you like the first originator of this idea?
Um, so there's a few parts to that. The the science of environmental enrichment has actually been studied for decades now. Just a brief summary of that. People found that people were doing experiments on lab rats, right? Um, and discovered that turns out if you keep a lab rat in a cage alone with no friends and nothing to do, you get very different results from your lab experiments than if you put them in like a really interesting environment that's enriched and maybe has other rats. They actually, they end up performing better, they live longer, they're smarter if they have this extra stimulation. And that's been, that environmental enrichment thing has been, seen throughout basically every species that it's been looked at in. And so that's, you can kind of think of like a home. Most homes are kind of like, as far as the dog's concerned, like an empty cage because they have nothing to do most of the time when they're there. But the other big thing is you talk to dog trainers and animal behaviorists and dog behaviorists, and they'll tell you that behavior problems and veterinarians, behavior problems are like the number one thing that people go to a trainer or vet about. And the first line of defense is like, well, what kind of mental stimulation are you giving your dog? What kind of life does your dog have? Like just generally, like what kind, is he just following you around all day and has like nothing to do, or is he just like alone and neglected? Well, like what do you think's gonna happen? If that's how they're living their lives. And so the best approach right now is you just make their life more interesting. You give them lots of different toys. You maybe make it harder for them to get their food. So if you've got a backyard, you take your dog's food and you throw it in the backyard and have them search for it for half an hour. And they love doing that. At least lots of them do. And that ends up addressing a lot of the behavior problems that dogs end up having.
So, but your design reminds me a little bit of like Super Simon and kind of like
Yeah.
those sort of tap games. Can you talk a little bit more about how you get from that to that specific design?
Right. So we call this the CleverPet Hub because we really want your whole home to become like a interactive virtual playground. So the touchpads are really just the simplest interface that we can put around our smart ability to provide exactly the right amount of food at exactly the right time. So
So
that is
can you
the
explain how that works a little bit? Explain it for
yeah.
people. I put a link up there so people can look at your successful Kickstarter. You got a lot of people who support you on Kickstarter, and they can actually see the product there as well.
Yeah.
But can you explain what the game actually looks like from a dog's perspective? What's the dog's eye view?
Totally. So the dog is looking at the game, and there's one touchpad, another, there's a one touchpad on one side, there's a touchpad in the middle, and there's a touchpad on the other side. And the first thing we actually teach your dog to do is to just touch those touchpads. So it's a learning process from the first minute your dog is interacting with the device. There's a whole sequence of things that the dog's actually learning, and dogs love learning things, right? So that is just the process of kind of understanding the Clever Pet Hub is fun and interesting and engaging. Um, but where we're headed is to teach the dog that the lights matter, right? To teach them that a touchpad that lights up is something that's relevant. And if you pay attention to it, maybe if you touch a touchpad that is lit up, you might get some food. So the games actually start really simple. All three touchpads light up, and then the dog touches any of them, and then they get some food, and then maybe two are only lit up, and so they're having to learn to ignore the one that's not lit up. And then only one lights up, and then they have to ignore two of them, and just the one that's lit up. And then from there, that's kind of the foundation, because once they understand the relationship between the lights and touching the touchpads, that's when everything becomes possible. So now you can have like a memory game. So you can have one touchpad, then another touchpad, then another touchpad light up, and then they have to press them in that sequence. It's really about creating it's really about making it possible to use software to teach your dog to play a game.
I kind of love your excitement about this, and I'm similarly excited about the idea of being able to do this sort of thing with dogs. Um, what do you do when you're testing the design of a gamified system for animals? Like, how do you actually like test this idea? We know how to test it in humans, but how do we do it in animals?
That's a great question. How do you test it? Um, So we do a lot of beta testing. We send CleverPet hubs to people's homes, and they try and well, the person has to figure it out. The dog has to figure it out. We get their responses, and we factor in their feedback, and then we try and improve the device. But fundamentally, actually, the interface that we've created is very similar to uh, interfaces that have been used in scientific contexts for a long time. So we're not actually reinventing the wheel. What we're doing is we're commercializing uh, existing technology and making it beautiful, desirable, the kind of thing that you would want to have in your living room or in your kitchen, or and that's really easy to use, right? So we don't need to. The nice thing is we don't need to test it as much because we're not. This is not invented from whole cloth. This is about mass market of something that was very niche to begin with.
Yeah, because did it originally kind of get this idea of this like kind of topping and releasing the food? This is kind of like behavioral science research, right? This is the kind of thing that behavioral scientists do with dogs. Was there a particular like kind of set
With
of
all sorts
traces
of
where you were
animals, yeah.
drawing your inspiration from?
Sorry, was there a particular? So uh, the 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 person who the fundamentals of kind of behaviorist uh, training come from B.F. Skinner. He uh, he invented or was a big proponent at least of operant conditioning, and that is
Right.
the basis for what we're doing. I actually personally believe that will be able to go beyond simple associationist kind of operant conditioning to things that are more conceptual and abstract, but that is the foundation for a lot of what we're
And
doing.
I want to talk about that because normally when we talk about operant conditioning and humans, it tends
Yeah,
to quickly drift into a this is bad because people become addicted to
sure.
it. So can you talk a little bit about the potential risks or dangers or concerns about operant conditioning and your home pet?
Well, so one question for you is why is it bad when a human becomes addicted to an operant style feedback system?
Yeah, that wasn't. It's not my value judgment. I'm sort of presenting it as like the kind of thing that you hear
Well,
from
why
like a
do people
Skinner
believe that
box.
it might be bad?
Okay, so a Skinner box is usually used in a derisive tone. So as a general rule, whenever Skinner is invoked in discussions of behavior change and engineering,
Totally.
he's like the most evil guy apparently who's ever existed, and his ideas are complete junk, right? Because we're supposed to do everything in an intrinsically motivated way.
Sure.
But I would say if people had an objection, a legitimate concern about it, the legitimate concern would be that because some percentage of the population becomes very compulsive in response to operant conditioning, not everybody. It's never 100% of a human population. It's always some percent gets really connected to this particular reward system.
Right.
That if that's being used for something that's not accretive, so if that's being used, for example, in a gambling context, that
Sure.
percentage of people is harmed by
Right.
operant conditioning. I think that would be the
Right.
most rational argument.
Right. Yeah. And if I hear you correctly, you're saying um, there's some portion of the population that becomes compulsive, and if I could elaborate on that, I would say that they um, do that kind of behavior to the exclusion of other rich, important, accretive things they should be doing in their lives.
Sure.
When you're dealing with a population that has literally nothing better to do with their time, those concerns
Okay.
are much reduced. So that's one side of it. The other side is the populations that tend to show the worst behavior and have the biggest problems are often groups of people that are kind of using this behavior as a form of escape because they have uh, otherwise less strong coping mechanisms for dealing with other things that are happening in their lives, right? Um, so, so I would say that in the case of, uh, again, in the case of the population that we're working with, the underlying problem is is the lack of mental stimulation in the first place, and maybe the lack of meaningful social relationship with the other beings in their lives. And so, I think that with a product like ours, we can address kind of both sides of that.
So, what do you actually think is when you talk about more complex behaviors that go beyond simple,
Right.
pushing levers? What are some of the things that are on your mind, and what are some of the things you're hoping you'll be able to do?
So great question. I like to draw an analogy to a board game, right? Um, what was that? What's the name of that board game where you like press the button in the middle and it like there's a die that spins around and you go. Last time I played that I was probably 7 years old.
There's
But
a few of them that behave like that. Um, like Boggle uses a press mechanism, but it's not a
Boggle's one
great.
of them. I
Yeah.
think, well, let's just say Monopoly, right? Like you get a Monopoly board, and if you've never played Monopoly before, and you're looking at this thing that has a bunch of colors and words on it, there's some pieces of paper, there's some pieces of plastic. Um, like it's not, what's interesting about Monopoly? Why would I want to play Monopoly? If you had never heard of board games and someone presented this thing to you and said, "This is really fun. Like if you do it with other people," you'd be like, not going to do it. That's ridiculous. I'm going to go play soccer." Right? Like what makes Monopoly interesting is that you begin to care about those little pieces of plastic and those little pieces of paper and where you are on that board. Um, and so when I think about like the higher level conceptual structure that we can create with even just simple touchpads, that's kind of where my head goes. That's so I think we can, you can imagine a game like Catch the Squirrel where the touchpads move back and forth and you've got to kind of do it quickly enough. And maybe if you touch this one, then you have to touch the one right beside it really quickly as well. Like you can, so there's a lot of actual kind of work that can be done, even with a very simple interface through timing and through the creation of meaning on the part within the person that's playing or the dog that's playing with the device. I hope that makes
So
sense. It's kind of out
yeah, no,
there.
no. So no, but it's interesting because I think you're like kind of this. I think of you as a little bit of this like mad scientist behavior person who's like, um, and I don't know, Leo. I don't know why it's you, but I love that it's you. Why are you the first person to come to this moment in time? Because it seems so obvious when you present it's like, hey, we have this stuff, we could be doing this with animals, and it's so interesting to hear you like you're like a game designer thinking about designing stuff for animals. Why do you think it's now is the moment, and why is it you?
Great. I mean, I think it's a great question. I think it's been. I mean, I spent a long time like thinking about the foundations of cognitive science, like and why people create meaning in the world and why people do what they do. Um, why, yeah. So why hasn't this happened before? I mean, I frankly think that an idea like this is so crazy that you kind of need the support network of like a frothy startup, hardware friendly startup land to like make it possible um, because there's like this small window when like crazy ideas are possible, and right now it's only been in software that we've seen them kind of come to fruition, and that's because like one 19-year-old could just do it in, without worrying about kids or a mortgage or what other people thought about them. And so I think it's just like the social dynamics of historically, and the opportunities and the kind of like degree of obstacles that are much lower today, especially in hardware.
Um, yeah, well, but it's interesting because I think it's like you describe it as like a crazy idea. So I'm sort of, to me, it feels entirely not crazy. Nothing about what you're
Okay,
looking at feels
good.
crazy to me. So I don't understand this. Can you talk a little bit about the reaction that people have had? Like, what's been the response to CleverPet so far, other than, you raised, I guess, $180,000 in Kickstarter, right? What
Yeah,
else has been
yeah.
the reaction?
So I would say the reactions fall into very much like two camps. People who think of dogs as just being dogs, and they think that making a game console for your dog is, or a gaming system for your dog is like the pinnacle of first world problems, and of first world problems, right? And they don't really kind of think it's interesting. And the other thing, I think that's also impacted by the fact that everything pet is kind of aw shucks, like it's diminutive. Like the word, there's a reason why we use the word pet name, right? It's like
Right,
intrinsically like a mini me, right? And
right.
so there's this kind of putting into a box that happens a little bit with everything in pet. And I think it's this kind of short circuiting, this emotional short circuiting that happens with dogs and cats that I think actually prevents people from taking them seriously as thinking and feeling entities in the world. And cognitive science, one of the big things you learn in cognitive science is like what makes you different from other animals, and and the lessons that we've learned like year on year is fewer and fewer things make us different from other animals, and there's this like tiny
Right.
sliver of, well, 100,000 years of culture, language, opposable thumbs, agriculture, like this set of things that like it's not intrinsically human. It's not really. I don't think creativity is like what makes us intrinsically human. I think it's like 100,000 years of history that makes us intrinsically human. So anyway, there's one camp that sees it as first world problems. Pet things are small, and then there's this second camp that's like, oh my god, like I need this right now. This is awesome. Like I can't wait to find out what my dog can do. I can't wait to discover this new way of interacting with my dog. Um, and that we love talking to that second group of people. Those conversations are great.
So it's very interesting that you described it as you used the term game console for a second there and then kind of backed off of that. Can you, like, in your imagination, if we let our imaginations run wild for a second, you've talked about
Sure.
that. Is one of the ideas for Clever Pet, is one of your visions for that to really have like it's like a gaming platform on which people can make other cool things? What does that look like?
Yeah. So yeah, our vision really is to turn your whole home into an interactive, exciting environment for your dog and cat, or your dog, or maybe even your cat, but principally dogs right now, all day. And that that might involve a lot of additional things that we could add to a system like that, frankly. Um, but I think we'll leave that to our own progress as a company for people to discover.
So, okay, so two things that I do want to talk about for a second is how would this be different if it was cats?
Oh, okay. How would it be different if it was cats? That's an interesting question. It might be a little bit smaller. Um,
Sure.
but we made it. I mean, there's nothing apart from like the overall size of it. Uh, we didn't. There wouldn't be any huge differences in the case of making it for cats. Um,
from a design standpoint, so from a cognitive standpoint, in terms of how the game is structured and what they're doing
Yeah.
as they play the game, is the idea that that's like kind of a similar game would be interesting to both dogs and cats?
I That's my hypothesis, frankly. That's what I believe. I think the biggest difference in the case of cats would be that we would find the way people interact with the device. So there's this like trifecta. You've got the device, you've got a person, and then you've got your dog or cat, right? And we are designing a system that needs to kind of acknowledge the constraints and needs and potential of kind of all three of those, and understand that they're interacting all with each other. And I think that the person the way that the person teaches your cat to use CleverPet, that would be the thing that changes most with cats. I think from our side, on the software side of the device itself, I think that would probably remain roughly the same. But I think people's expectations would be very different when a cat's involved. It might take longer. In fact, I'm pretty sure it would. At least it would take longer for a cat to progress. And cats don't like working, I think, as much as dogs do. Right? And the other big thing is cats don't, at least most don't, and then cats also don't seem to need as much mental stimulation during the day as a dog does. You don't get cats destroying things just out of sheer frustration and need to do something, right? So I think it would be a slower process. I think they probably wouldn't progress as quickly as a dog would.
Can you tell us anything about the results that you've had so far?
So yeah, so we've had, I can tell kind of one story. We had um, one one of our early prototypes was put in a home, and the owner was had previously had problems with this dog because the dog would spend a bunch of time digging out in the backyard for lizards and chasing lizards and tearing up the garden and stuff. And while he had CleverPet in his home, the dog played a lot with CleverPet, and most of his prey drive was significantly diminished. He seemed to, you know, so that's I think one really great story. But frankly, I mean, we're going to China next week, and we'll be deeply in the production process of making hundreds and thousands of CleverPet hubs, and I think that we'll really be able to see the kinds of results once we've got these in hundreds of people's homes for extended periods of time. This is really just square one for us.
Do you that's so exciting. Do you imagine that we'll move beyond the like pellets of food? And is it food or treats that's used primarily in it?
Yeah, we've designed this so that you can provide all of your dog's food throughout the day through a CleverPet hub. It holds about 2.5 cups of kibble. You can fortify or enrich the kibble. You can have highly enriched kibble by putting treats in it, which can make it more exciting. In fact, we advise that people start the device off with like maybe lots of treats and then slowly ramp down the number of treats and ramp up the amount of kibble, because that'll help your dog learn to play with the device more and more quickly. And so we want it to be kibble, but we understand that people have very particular ways that they feed their dog, and so frankly, we've designed the system to be very flexible. So if people want to feed their dog half wet food and half dry food, then they can feed their dog the wet food the way they normally would, and they could feed their dog the dry food through the CleverPet hub. Or if they want, they could put just 20 pieces, like 20 treats or 50 treats in the CleverPet hub, and then just feed their dog normal dry food as they would otherwise. It's really up to the person that has the
That's
dog.
awesome. Essen mentioned in the chat that she wonders if this is going to be the next dog whisperer, and I said it sounds like it could be, and certainly more reliable and accessible if you can't get to Caesar Milan yourself.
Yeah, there's only
Leo,
one Caesar Milan, unfortunately.
that, that's right, but there's going to be a clever pen in every house. Okay, tell people if they didn't participate in the Kickstarter how they can get a clever pet for their own house.
So you can go to getcleverpet.com and you can sign up to win a free CleverPet when we launch, when we ship. And you'll also, of course, learn. We'll also make sure that you know like when they're available for sale. So we'll be doing a pre-order campaign in Q1, and we hope that you participate. That if you want a Clever Pet, that you participate in the pre-order campaign and get one of the first units out of the batch, and really kind of join us as we discover all the amazing things that dogs can do.
I cannot wait to stay on top of it. And for those of you who don't go to getcleverpet.com, which you can totally do, you can also follow Leo and the Clever Pet team at getcleverpet on Twitter. Leo Trottier, thank you so much.
Thanks, Gabe.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. I'm Gabe Zichermann. You can follow me on Twitter at gzichermann. It's been a great edition of the Gamification Revolution. Certainly exciting. I can't wait to use one of these clever pets in my own life. And I can't wait to see you guys again, probably in 2 weeks' time, when we meet up again to talk about gamification and engagement. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you soon. In the meantime, keep having fun, everyone.
Thanks, Gabe.